Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor, the part number 2 of the top real estate math. And welcome to everyone joining us in here today, and thank you for tuning in. Who was here with us last week for last week's episode of Real Estate Math? We did that last Wednesday, I believe 12 noon as we went live. We got a special time for today, extra special for part 2 at 2 o'clock. And we're going to do just a quick little recap here of some of the different types of math that was covered last week here. So if we start off here, we talked about, if you want to go back and watch last week's, if you're at tampaschoolofrealestate.com, if you're watching on tampaschoolofrealestate.com, make sure you put in your email on there so you get notifications whenever it is we have information, because we did this last week live on the air. It's on our YouTube, it's on our Facebook, you can find it, but easiest place is tampaschool.com. And you can always reach out to us directly if you have any questions. But we covered commission. So we talked about how a $450,000 sale could turn into $10,000 of commission that goes into your pocket, $9,450. We did the math on that to where you've got a total commission, an office split where there's 2 different offices involved, and then a split with your broker, but that still ends up leaving you $9,450. So that's usually the math most people get started with, because that's usually the math that leads them into, well, maybe I should go check out this this little 7-day, 8-day real estate class. Maybe that'd be worth the investment. But we also covered taxes due, and this one I know we spent a lot of time on this because this is one that a lot of people are confused by, but especially when you follow these steps for going through solving these, this makes it so much more systematic and repeatable. And that's one of the key things about this math for the exam. There's a lot of people that, when it comes to the math on the exam, they take the idea, and let me know if this is you in the chat. Maybe you're watching over on Facebook or YouTube, wherever it is that you're tuning in from. Has that been you? Has math been one of the things that have held you back? Maybe it's something you're actually actively struggling with when it comes to passing your exam, or maybe it's something that's even held you back from even taking that exam in the first place. So the math can be very, very intimidating. But here's the good news if you're intimidated by the math. So number 1 is the math is only 10 questions. So there's only 10 math questions on this entire exam. And on top of that, these questions are multiple choice. So A, B, C, D multiple choice, 4 option multiple choice. And you don't get penalized for wrong answers. You just don't get any points. So you could completely guess without even reading the question, and you have a 25% chance of getting it right. So worst case scenario, you've already got 25% chance that you'll get the math question right, not knowing how to do any math. As long you don't even need to know how to read. That's probably going to affect you for the other 90% of the exam. But literally, because this is, again, only 10 questions, they're multiple choice, A, B, C, D. You know, if you're coming up at the end of time on your exam, you do have 3.5 hours for your state exam, 3.5, so you've got more than enough time. Most people, I remember one of the exams I took, for my broker license specifically, and that's a tough exam, but I was done within like 35 minutes. To the point where I was like, well, I probably went through this a little too fast, so I went back through and double checked everything. But then I submitted, I think like 45 minutes in, I was like, all right, I'm wasting my time here. Let's go, I know I passed. And I did. I was able to pass that one on my first try. But that's the thing, when you know this information, it's not a question of if you pass, it's a question of when you'll pass this exam. And the math, it seems intimidating, but honestly, the math is easier to study for than the rest of the exam. Because it's so specific, it's so particular. You just need to memorize the sequence and the steps to solve these different math questions, just like we were doing here on the board. If you could recreate this, even if you don't understand this, if you're able to recreate this, this is going to get you to be able to reproduce this on the exam with slightly different numbers. And remember, you're able to use a calculator on your exam. So basically a calculator that looks like this, a basic 4-function calculator. Nothing too crazy, and you don't need anything crazier than this. This is all you need to be able to take this exam, is a basic 4-function calculator. And so you could do all this math that you see right here just with this, because really the only math we're doing is subtraction and multiplication. That's all the math is here. That's all we did for this. And this is one of the longer problems. And yes, they can be long. There could be lots of steps to remember, but that's the thing. Repetition, getting the repetition. And even if you're practicing these same exact math questions over and over again, it's amazing how much that can actually do. And we've got one more here where we did a proration. So prorations, that's another big one, another like top 10, almost probably guaranteed. It's not, nothing. There's no guarantees with the exam. The only guarantee you can make is the guarantee you can make to yourself. But as close as I could get to guaranteeing this will be on the exam, this will probably be on your exam. Some form of a proration. Maybe like the property taxes like we did here, or maybe a rental proration. So let's go ahead and start out with that. And we are live here now. Let me go over to the chat here. Welcome in everyone tuning in live. Welcome Marie over on Facebook. Welcome to everybody tuning in YouTube land. And welcome to everyone tuning in on TampaSchoolOfRealEstate.com. Drop in the comments if there's any specific type of math you want to go over. Maybe you've already gone through the class and you're maybe struggling with a certain type, or if you're just like, I just want to know the math, I'm not quite sure what I don't know, sit back, relax, and let's do some math here. So what we're going to do is kind of like a recap of last week in relation to prorations, but rather than property taxes, because that's what we did here. Here, this was property tax proration. So what we do with this property tax proration is we take the taxes due, and these are separate problems, so you wouldn't necessarily have to combine these together on the exam. Don't think like that deep into it. Two major problems like this would be standalone problems typically, because there is a certain amount of time that the Florida Real Estate Commission and the Bureau of Education and Testing basically accounts for each of these questions on the exam. So there could be some tough ones on there, but not like where you're compounding like two of the longest questions possible together. There are limitations they have on a per question basis for that. But with this, we figured out the taxes due. And then what we did is a completely separate problem, but of a proration of how much of the taxes actually go to the buyer at closing from the seller's fair share of the time it is that they own the property. Because the taxes are an annual figure and we prorate it based on how long the seller owned the property to determine what portion of the taxes have to be paid by the seller, and then we have a proration at closing. And normally in the real world, this is the title company that does this. It's good to understand this math so you could speak to it, because this is something that comes up in the real world when you're practicing real estate on your net sheets. So net sheets, prorations are a big part of it, because this essentially gives the buyer free money for buying the house. It's not really free money because it's just basically money they're getting in advance for the taxes that are going to be due at the end of the year, but it kind of works like free money when it comes to actually closing the deal on the house. And with as many regulations as there can be sometimes for lending, it's not like you don't have the money, but it's good to have some money credited to you so you're not having to also come up with this extra money for the seller's time they're owning the property on top of all the other cost and prepaid you have to make when you're buying a home. And that home buying process, it can be really intimidating, and that's the value that we provide as real estate professionals, being able to simplify this down. So while you might not need to know how to do this exact math in the real world, if you could simplify what this means to your buyers and sellers, it's going to help you look a lot more like a professional. So let's do a rental proration. And let's set this one up. Let's get rid of our calculator. We're going to pull that back up here in just a minute. But first, we're going to just go through the information that would be given to us in the question. What we'll do is we'll put that in. Let's see what we were doing before. Let's use the same color scheme. I think we were doing, okay, black. So we'll put in black everything that's given to you in the question. So we're going to do a rental proration. And these questions, the way they're worded, if you want any practice with specifically how the questions are structured and set up like they are on the state exam, as well as your end of course exam, the question simulator is part of our Pass First Try exam prep bundle, and that is one of the best tools for simulating actual exam questions in the format they would appear on your actual exam. They're not necessarily the same questions, but rumor has it from our students is we've got a pretty good idea of what topics are important. And look, I'm here to say that's more than a rumor. We pay very close attention to what the Florida Real Estate Commission deems important, especially as it relates to this curriculum. And that's how we've became known as the Pass First Try Real Estate School. If you're in Tampa, you probably call us Tampa School of Real Estate. But if you're outside of Tampa, you might just know us as the Pass First Try guys and girls. But let's talk about the rental proration. So this is very similar to your property tax proration. And the way I like to set this up again, just like we did last week, is with a little number line here. But rather than this being a year, because when we were dealing with taxes, we did January to December, the entire year, because that's how the property taxes are figured. Let's say we've got the month of June. And how many days are in June? Well, if you remember from last week, we did the 30 days have September, April, June, November. April, June, November. Or you could do the trick with your knuckles where you work your way across, and your knuckles are 31 days. Between your knuckles is 30 days, or February's case, 28. So whatever you got to do, go back and watch last week's episode. Look, we've got hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours at this point, honestly, for free on the internet. We just pump this out on a weekly basis. We've been doing it for years, of information to help you better understand real estate, because we know that you need information to get going. And we know that this class alone, the pre-licensing class to get your license, yeah, it's going to teach you this math and some laws and rules, but there's so much more to building a real estate empire. This isn't just some sort of certificate that you're getting from us and that's all we're here for. We're here to help set your future up for success. And that comes all the way down even to the curriculum and the way it is that we teach and deliver our information here at the Tampa School of Real Estate, because we want to be known for helping people build successful real estate careers, not being known as a place that people go to take a class. I mean, which one would you rather go to? The place to take a class, the place that has an online class, or the place that has the best classes and produces the best real estate agents in the industry? Kind of the reputation we're working on for ourselves here at Tampa School of Real Estate. We've had some big names that have came through Tampa School of Real Estate. The only thing is they weren't always big names when they came into Tampa School of Real Estate. So real estate has done amazing things for my careers, but what is so much more empowering and fulfilling to me is what it's able to do for so many other people's careers. And any way I could be part of that process to help you build your real estate empire. But that might involve getting your license, which might involve you passing this exam, which might involve you doing this math. So back to what we're talking about today. We're going to have a closing date. That's going to be given to you in the question. And let's say it's June 15th. Closing date of June 15th. We're going to say day of closing belongs to the buyer. And we're going to say the rent is $2,000. Now, if you're tuning in at home, tell me this. When is rent collected? If you've ever paid rent before, you probably paid it in this form at this time. So when it comes to rent, is that something that you're paying after you live in a property or before you're even allowed to move in? And so rent is pretty much always prepaid. I've yet to find a landlord that takes post-paid rent, meaning that you live there and then you pay them rent. Usually it's the other way around. Money comes first. You've got to pay like first month's, last month's security deposit just to get in the door. And then you're paying rent on a regular basis in advance. So rent is pretty much always prepaid. And so what that means for our proration is that this $2,000 for the month of June is collected here on June 1st. And so when we have our closing date here of June 15th, this is when the ownership is going to change, because over here, this is where the seller owns the property. And over here on this side, this is where the buyer owns the property. So the ownership changes on this day of closing, and according to our question right here, the day of closing belongs to the buyer. And the only thing I've done up until this point here is just lay out the information differently than would be shown in the question. Because in your question, it's going to be as sentences, multiple sentences probably for this much information, where it'll say there's a buyer closing on a home in Dade County on June 15th. Rent in the amount of $2,000 was collected at the beginning of the month by the seller. The day of closing belongs to the buyer. Calculate the proration and who is due credits and debits. So that's probably how this question would be worded, and this is the information it is that we've got to pull out of that to be able to successfully answer this question. So now we're going to switch to red, because now we're going out of our brain. Now we're going out of what we need to know, what we need to bring to the table, other than just laying out this information in a way that makes a little bit more sense to us here. And so what we're going to need to figure out So the seller has all the money right here on June 1st. Buyer won't get any rent money until July, but that'll be for the month of July. And so we're not talking about that because the buyer will own it in July. We're talking about, and not even that money actually, because we don't care about how much money the seller keeps. We care about how much rent the buyer is due. And that's going to be based upon the days that the buyer owns this property. And this is one of the differences from taxes, because taxes are not prepaid, taxes are paid in arrears, meaning at the end of the year. So going back to last week's math we did on last week's episode on the property tax proration, if you remember that, we were actually calculating the seller days instead of buyer days, and we were doing the seller's dollar amount because we wanted the seller's fair share that they have to kick over for their time that they own the property. Now, since we have rent that's already collected, we're trying to find out, well, what about the time the buyer owns the property? Because it's not really fair that the buyer is in possession for the property of all this time, but they don't get any rent money until July, and that rent money is for July, so they should be fairly compensated for the time they own the property. But the tenant's not going to pay additional rent, so what do? We got to take the rent that was already paid and split this up according to how many days the buyer owned the property. Now, this is where this question is going to get tricky, so let's take a little break here. If you're already running through this problem, trying to solve this one because you remember it from class, go ahead and take a stab at it. Go ahead and try it right now, but let me stop you at probably the first step. How many days do we have here? So who do we got live on Facebook or in YouTube or on the Success Center who they could drop a comment in for how many days we're actually working with here? Now, if you're already taking the class, you might know the trick to this, which if you do, feel free to share. But this is definitely a tricky type of question here for how many days it is that we're working with. Yeah, so the number of days here, at first, what it makes you want to think is that it is 15 days, right? Now, some of you might know the trick already. You might not know. You might know it's already not 15 days. And you might be saying, John, what are you talking about? How is this not 15 days? Isn't 30 minus 15, 15? Well, 30 minus 15, I'm not going to argue with on that one. That is 15. But we're not working with 15 days here because the math isn't 30 minus 15. The math is how many days do we have here going from 15th to 30th? But here's the catch. Because this day of closing belongs to the buyer, which is told to us right in the question, that essentially basically gives us like an extra day because we got to count the 30th and we need to count the 15th. So if you actually count these out, and you can do tally marks like this, or you can do it on your fingers, whatever. Don't worry about people judging you when you take your exam. If you've got to sit over there and do this, your neighbor might look over at you and say, wow, that person's doomed, but really they're going to be doomed because you're not allowed to look at your neighbor when you're taking the exam. So don't do that. No one's going to be looking at you. Nobody cares. It's only the exam proctor, and they don't care if you got to do this here. They're going to see that all day long. They've probably seen worse things. So if you got to count on your fingers or do tally marks or whatever, but this is the number one opportunity for you to make a mistake. It's the number one time where I've made a mistake personally, and being in, in-person classes where I've graded exams and I've seen the work that people have turned in on the exams of the math. And one of the number one mistakes people make is getting wrong with this day of closing, the number of days. That's the easiest part to mess up in these types of questions. So be very careful that you count these correctly and fully. Because if we count these, we'll do tally marks here. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. As you count those out, we've got actually, put this in a different color, here's green, we'll do 16 days. 16 days that the buyer owns the property, not 15. And that's the whole point of this question right here. Because again, you do 30 minus 15, you're going to get this wrong because you're not including that day of closing. So to make sure you don't fall victim to easy tricks here, do what I just did right there. Count on your fingers or draw tally marks on your scratch paper so that way you know what the real number of days is. Because this is a pretty easy problem once we get that cleared up. Then we're just going to take it. Let's switch back to red here. Now it's a little bit easier to see. We're going to take our $2,000 from the question. That's the rent for the entire month. But we have 30 days in the month. And remember, we don't need to know how to do the math. We just need to know how to use our calculator. We need to know the steps and how to enter it in our calculator. So let's do that. 2,000 divided by 30 days gives us 66 and 66 repeating per day. And we're going to multiply that out times the number of days we've got here, which is 16. That's how many buyer days we have. So times 16 is going to give us $1,066. And we'll say 67 cents. Round it up there. So that would be your proration. And the way you'd enter this in is debit, seller, credit, buyer. And that is the same exact number for both of those, debit seller and credit buyer. Because what we're calculating here is the amount of money that the seller has for their share of the rent that belongs to the buyer for the buyer days. So out of that $2,000, slightly more, 1 day's worth more, just one single day's worth more, and it's this right here, makes it that one more day than half. Otherwise, it'd be an even 1,000. If it was 15 days and 15 days, if we were closing on the 16th and same situation day closing belongs to the buyer, then it would have been 15 and 15. But because we have 16 buyer days here, that's, again, what is the number one mistake for this type of question. And so with this math, like all the math, if you practice the steps going through these to solve these again and again and again, it's not even about doing different problems. It's about knowing the steps, because the steps are going to be consistent whenever you go through these here. And one of the best tools it is that I could recommend is our weekend prep recording, because at the end of that weekend prep recording, like the last 2 hours of that weekend prep recording, this is on demand 24/7 access for 6 months that you'll have with this. You could actually go through as much as you need to, basically all the different types of math. So there's 2 hours of that. And you can go through that, slow it down, speed it up, replay it. 6-month access, along with all the other topics that are covered in that weekend prep recording. That's essentially a weekend cram class, but that's available on demand, instant access. And that's what most of our students actually prefer, as opposed to just sitting in a room for 16 hours on end in an entire weekend and hoping you remember all that information when the exam comes. It's much more effective to pace yourself and constantly reinforce this information. So that's what all of our study tools, all our exam prep allows you to do, even when that comes into the math. But again, don't stress yourself out too much of the math, because the math is only 10% of the exam. Now we've got one other type of math question we're going to do next, and that is doc stamps, transfer taxes. If you remember the 70 cents per hundred, the 35 cents per hundred, the 2 mils for the intangible tax on new mortgages, we've got all that and more coming up after this quick break, so stick with us. My name is John Carissimo. You're watching Ask the Instructor. Are you studying for your Florida real estate exam? If you are, you need to check out our Pass First Try strategy. You're going to love this. It's 4 steps that we break down the process to study for your Florida real estate exam. So you're set up to pass your Florida real estate exam, because that's what you're studying for, right? To pass your exam. It's 4 steps. Number 1, you learn the information. You've got to learn this to be able to pass the exam, but it doesn't stop at learning. Step 2, you've got to reinforce the basic, simple, key concepts. As you learn this information, keep reviewing the simple things. You don't need to know everything, but you got to review these basic key concepts. Step 3, you've got to test your knowledge. The exam's going to test your knowledge, so if you don't test your knowledge in advance, you won't find out if you know what you think you know until you take the exam. And then step 4 is be confident and prepared, because even if you know this material, you need to be confident that you know the material. Check out the full strategy at PassFirstTry.com. That's PassFirstTry.com. Wanted to get your real estate license but have been struggling to find an instructor-led course that fits your schedule? I'm proud to introduce to you our on-demand instructor-led pre-licensing course. Now you do not have to make a course schedule fit around your schedule to take an instructor-led course. This course is designed to be 100% video-based instruction. And this video-based instruction, even though this is pre-recorded video, still gives you the opportunity to engage and interact with the information to ensure your understanding of important key concepts so you're prepared for your end-of-course exam and state exam. My name is John Chrismo, and I'll be your instructor in this course. And I've been with the Tampa School of Real Estate for several years now and have helped personally thousands of people going through the licensing process. I'm excited to be your instructor throughout this course. Now, as you're going through the course, if you need help, we're just a click away. In the corner, you'll see a little yellow chat bubble where you can message our student support team, where you'll be able to get in touch with our team of licensed support professionals that have sales associate licenses, broker licenses, and instructor licenses as well. So you don't have just one instructor, you have a whole team of people from the Tampa School of Real Estate to help keep you on track, to help keep you in the important information, and to help keep you moving closer towards building your real estate career, getting it off the ground, and being able to go out there to join a broker, to activate your license, and start earning commissions. All of that is possible and so much more. But to get started, you need to enroll. So enroll today. Take advantage of the special offer we have on this on-demand pre-licensing course. You'll have instant access. As soon as you enroll, you'll get an email with information to log into your course online so you get logged in and start completing your course today. You don't have to wait until the class starts. The class is already there waiting for you. So take action today and let's start building your real estate empire. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of Ask the Instructor, where we're covering real estate math. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. Welcome in, Sunset Mike. Good to see you again. But let's get back into the math. I told you before we went on break here, we're going to cover doc stamps. So let's cover doc stamps, or what's more commonly known as transfer taxes. Transfer taxes. So what are transfer taxes? Well, there's ultimately three of them. You have a doc stamp on deed. You have a doc stamp on note. And finally, you have the intangible tax. Now, as I mentioned, in the real world, the title company will be doing this math for you, as well as the lender. This is part of the closing disclosure. This ultimately isn't your job to run these numbers in the real world here. That's the closing agent. Whoever's handling the closing is, again, primarily who's going to be running all these numbers, computing all this here. But you want to be able to, again, make sure that, especially things like your commission, is appropriately accounted for. But then if your clients have more preliminary questions before you even get to this step here, you could speak to some of the costs and expenses that a seller may have to be able to sell the property, as well as a buyer would have to be able to take out a loan. Both of these here are going to be expenses the buyer typically pays. So let's do a quick zoom out here. So this is normally the buyer, and this one up here is normally the seller. So the seller pays for the tax on the deed, whereas the buyer is responsible for the note tax and the intangible, because these are both taxes on a mortgage. And so what these formulas actually are, and this is what you really need to remember here, and this is a very common question on your exam. So 70 cents per $100 of price. So 70 cents per $100 of price. That's your stamp on the deed. The stamp on the note is 35 cents per $100 of loan. And finally, the intangible tax is 0.002. So 2 mils is actually how that works out on new mortgages only. On new loans only. So any new mortgages, that's where you're going to have to pay an intangible tax. Whereas new or assumed mortgages, you'll have to pay this doc stamp on the note. And if you're taking on a new mortgage, you're essentially paying two different transfer taxes. So I know that seems like a lot to remember, and this is probably the question that has the most to remember when it comes to actually solving. And that's just because there's, again, literally all of these, I don't want to call these formulas because it's a very simple calculation for calling it a formula. But if you want to intimidate yourself and call it a formula, you can. But I don't even like to think of these as formulas. These are just the rules. This is just how much it costs. This is just how much the taxes are. 70 cents per $100 of the price, 35 cents per $100 of the loan on all loans, and then 0.002 on new loans. So let's get into some math on this one here. Let's say that we've got a deal, a question that is got a sale price of $300,000. And let's say here we have a new loan of, let's see, what we'll say here. We'll say $240,000. And that's essentially all we need to take away unless there's other loans. If there are multiple loans in there, which on this exam question, they typically make you do this type of math twice. Or maybe one's a new loan where you have to charge both of these, but then maybe one of them is an assumed loan where you just charge the stamp on the note. So they could slightly complicate this a little bit. But overall, this one's a pretty easy question to get once you have these numbers, these rules, these costs of these taxes, formulas if you want to call them that, memorized. And so let's start off with this one, the sale price, which is going to be our doc stamp on the deed. I'm just going to call it the deed stamp, because you're buying stamps based on the price of your deed. So we have our price of $300,000. That's what the deed is being transferred for. It's being transferred for $300,000. We're going to divide that by 100 to find out that we need 3,000 stamps. Now, at this stage here, for the number of stamps, there is a very specific rounding rule that says you always round up, because the government doesn't want to get cheated out of their 70 cents. So if there's any fraction of a stamp, you need to buy a whole stamp, just like the mail works, unless you're buying like one of those stamps that are different amounts. Imagine the post office only had forever stamps, only the one cost, the 50 cent or whatever it costs now for a forever stamp. And if you wanted to mail more, you just have to add a second stamp on there. Yeah, you could go buy one of those like 10-cent stamps or something like that at the post office, but they don't have that for your deed stamp. They come in one size, and that's for $100. And so any $100, anything we incur, if this was $3,000.01 because this was $3,001, well, that's going to make it round up to 3,001 stamps that we would need here. We'd have to round up even if it was just 0.01 like that. But no special rounding for this one, so literally all we've got to do is remember that these stamps are 70 cents per 100, so now that we figured out how many hundreds, how many stamps, we just multiply by 70 cents. And that's actually as simple as this one is here, and let's use the calculator, because I'm no good at math. People think I'm good at math because I could come up here and write a bunch of stuff on this board, a bunch of numbers, but it's really the calculator doing all the calculating. You just got to know what to type in there. That's what we're here for. So $2,100 would be our cost of our deed stamp. And so typically this would show as a debit to seller. Now this is negotiable, but in most cases that'd be the seller paying that $2,100 for the deed stamp. And the note stamp is almost identical. But the difference is we're dealing with the loan amount rather than the price. So rather than starting with the price, we're going to start with the loan amount, which, going back to our question, was $240,000. So with a $240,000 loan, we're again going to figure out how many stamps we need, and the stamps come in $100 increments. And so that's going to give us 2,400 stamps. And let's double check that, because I keep telling you I'm good at math, but divided by 100, that's usually pretty easy, because we just take away the 2 zeros. And there we go. Oh, I didn't put enough zeros in. And see, that's why you always want to use your calculator, because you don't know if your head's doing anything like this here. And that's why we always want to double check. 240,000 divided by 100. There we go, 2,400. Our math checks out. Calculator says it's okay, so let's continue. And again, I break it down, even though like you're probably sitting there, come on, John, I know that's 2,400. Always double check that. You never know. Run your numbers twice, because there's only 10 math questions. Just make sure the calculations you're doing are right, because once you start to get to know this, the only thing that could go wrong is doing this. 240,000. Wait, that's not 240,000. But if you go just right into going to divide without getting that extra zero in there, that's how you end up with a wrong number like I did there. So take your time when you're using your calculator. Make sure these numbers are going in correctly. You have ample time on the exam, 3.5 hours for that state exam. So you could really crunch these numbers a lot in that 3.5 hours. Now let's say these again are 35 cents. That's what we have to recommend or remember about the doc stamp on the note. It's 35 cents for every $100. So now that 2,400 times 35 cents, this one we're going to need the calculator for, $840. And that's typically going to be a debit to the buyer. Because usually the buyer is responsible for paying the taxes on their loan. The deed is coming from the seller. The seller is selling you their deed, so that's why the seller typically pays for the deed stamp, but this is the buyer's loan they're taking out, so the buyer typically pays for the note stamp. And the intangible tax is a third tax, so the second one on mortgages, so you're getting double taxed on the loan if it's a new loan. If it's assumed, you're just doing the note stamp. So assumed loans only have the note stamp, but your new loans are going to involve also what's known as the intangible tax. And again, this one is only new loans. So if this said the loan was assumed, we wouldn't have to calculate this intangible tax. But this one's the easiest one here because we just take the loan amount. So that same $240,000, that's what it said in the question, times 0.002. So that's all you need to remember for this one, times 0.002. You can even put it in your calculator, 240,000. Make sure you get the right number of zeros, times 0.002. Again, the number of zeros will make a significant difference to your answer. So make sure you double check that as you're putting these in. Take your time, do this carefully. But that should come out to be $480. And again, because this is a loan charge, because this is the cost with taking out a new loan, this is also a debit to the buyer. Now again, that can be negotiated otherwise, where the buyer is going to pay for all the taxes or the seller is going to pay for all the taxes. So this can be negotiated really so many different ways. That's a big part of what we do as a real estate professional, is we help negotiate the deals. So if you have somebody talking about paying closing costs, or how do we pay all the closing costs, and that could be on either side depending on the type of market we're in, or that your local market is in. Is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? Because that's going to dictate how you can negotiate and who's going to pay for what closing costs. And again, help get an estimate of that. Of course, you have these title companies and vendors that are there to actually do these math, and they'll typically roll out the red carpet because they want to gain the business when you actually do go to close that property. So you've got plenty of help and support. But not only is this something essential for the exam, it's something that maybe you don't need to know how to do it this in depth, but you have at least enough of an idea of it where you could speak to it, and you could speak to those numbers on the closing sheets that you're going to get from the title company, just in case you're asked any questions. You don't need to know how to do this exact math. They're not expecting to whip out the calculator and double check the numbers on that there. Who knows, maybe somebody is, but that's probably a better job for an accountant, not your realtor, because the accountant is the person that balances all those numbers here. But for us, understanding what those numbers mean, that's a big part of our responsibility. We're like the liaison for so many different parts of the sale, of the transaction, where a lot of the communication will be done directly with these other vendors, but at the same time, you're like the CEO of the transaction. So that's where this math can really be beneficial for the real world as well, because a lot of these numbers are calculations that are done every single day. It just might not be you doing them, but understanding how they came to and what makes them up, that's something really essential to providing a superior value to your clients. So those are two very important math questions. Let's just recap these maths again for everything we talked about. And we'll start back with last week's episode. So in case you did not catch last week's episode here, we did commission first and foremost. If you're watching this video, it might be because you already know how to do this. You're like, ooh, commission, that's $9,450 for potentially 8 to 24 hours worth of work. Yeah, that's a pretty nice payday. Real estate agents can make very good money once they're trained on how to be effective and they take the necessary actions to be effective. So this commission, this is based on a $450,000 price with a commission split through the MLS, with another commission split with your broker, and still you're walking away with like almost 10 grand. So that's huge. That's the commission, and that's also potential math for your exam. We covered property taxes due. So this is another very important piece of math for your exam. And again, in the real world, you're not usually calculating the taxes due, but let's say you've got somebody that is going to be homesteaded or somebody who doesn't qualify for homestead. Being able to speak to what difference that makes to tax values is definitely very valuable from their realtor. This is the property tax proration. The proration is going to be in basically every single transaction that you do. Again, the title company is typically doing the math on this one here, but again, being able to speak to this, being able to understand how you come up with that free money for the buyer essentially at closing, because that's what this is here. And when you get to speak to that in that simple of a way, that makes sense to your clients as well. It's not necessarily free money. It's for the taxes that are due, but it's going to offset the cost that you have to actually close. So that can help you actually get into the closing rather than having to save up even more money just to close on the property. And then today we covered the rental proration. So very similar to the tax proration, but the difference here is we're dealing with just a single month's worth of rent rather than an entire year of property taxes. And then what we just finished was the transfer taxes. So zooming in again on this right here where we started from, knowing these costs of these different taxes is probably the most memorization you'll have to do for any math question on this exam. Probably for any one question on this exam, this would be the most. So that is literally the most difficult question on the exam, but it's not because it's hard math to do. I mean, as you can see here, it was literally just, we had division and then multiplication, and then division and then multiplication, and then just multiplication. And the only other thing you'll have to do maybe is add all three of those together if it's asking for the total, or just add the buyers together, or just the sellers. So the math is not hard, but what to do with those steps, how to go through that math, that's what you want to build the repetition on, because that's ultimately what you need to remember. And if you have any questions about the math, about the courses, about starting your real estate career, taking the next steps, reach out to one of our advisors. This is the phone number right here, 813-333-2676. It's again 813-333-2676. You can also visit us on our website, tampaschool.com, or again, call or text 813-333-2676. If you've already got your course completion credit, all you need to do is pass the exam. You don't need to take the course again. Even if you did have the worst experience ever, maybe you went to another school and it didn't work out so well for you, or maybe just life happened and got in the way, maybe the class was great, but you know, it was your own fault, whatever the reason may be that you don't feel like you're prepared for the exam. Even if you're not a Tampa School of Real Estate student with us already, you could purchase into our Pass First Try exam prep study tools. So a lot of schools, they don't allow you to get their exam prep unless you actually took the pre-licensing course. They like bundle it together, and we do have bundles as well. But if you want to purchase the exam prep because you already have your course completion, like for example, again, that weekend prep recording, it's 14 hours of content that you can review on demand, and it's focused on exam content, not just on teaching the whole class, because there's a lot of stuff in the pre-licensing course that will be taught that isn't necessarily required, that is required, but won't necessarily be tested on the exam. It could show up on the exam for certain topics, but then there's some things, whether because it's new or because it's being pulled from the curriculum or whatever it is, that there's certain things that we know won't necessarily be on the exam, and there's certain topics that we know are some of the most likely questions to be on your exam. And so we build out our curriculum around that. We build out our study tools around that. We train and coach our staff and our team here at the Tampa School of Real Estate around those same concepts. And so if you want to find out what we're all about, how you could start your own real estate career, how you can get your post-licensing done, continue your education, get your broker license, move your real estate license here to Florida if you've got another license in another state, we've got the answers for you. Just call, text us, 813-333-2676. Again, that's 813-333-2676. That's about all the time we've got for today. I want to thank you for tuning in for today's math special. If you like today's episode, hit that thumbs up button for us so we know to do more math. You know, we had such a great turnout last week of people really appreciating the information we provided in that part 1 of the math, that we had to come back for part 2 for these other top questions that you're very likely to see on your exam. So hopefully this helps you in knocking out and getting this exam done. But again, if you need a little bit more help, if you want a little bit more streamlined focus just on what is need to know, that's where, again, call us up, text us 813-333-2676, or you can go directly to passfirsttry.com. That's passfirsttry.com. I want to thank you again for tuning in today. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the videos. But other than that, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on Friday for State of Real Estate. Hey, so if you're thinking about starting a real estate career, it could feel a little overwhelming sometimes. Look, that's completely understandable. That's why we're here to help. If you haven't already, check out our Success Center, tampaschool.com/success, or if you don't even know where to begin, give us a call. We'd love to help you out. We've got advisors standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way it is that we can. Our phone number is 813-928-0106. Again, that's 813-928-0106. Give us a call. We're the Tampa School of Real Estate.
Do you want a career that allows you to be in control? With a career in real estate, you'll get to call the shots. Whether you're looking at starting part-time or want to become the next top agent, a career in real estate makes it possible. Find out what it takes at tampaschool.com. Do you want to incorporate studying for your real estate exams into your busy schedule? Now you can review the key topics you need to know to pass your class and state exams with our MP3 audio review. Simply pop in your headphones or connect to your car to reinforce crucial information while you exercise or drive. Listen to the first unit for free at mp3audioreview.com. That's mp3audioreview.com.
Are you thinking about a career in real estate? Hey, I'm John Charisma with the Tampa School of Real Estate, and we've helped thousands of people just like you obtain their real estate license. If you're thinking about a career in real estate, give us a call. The phone number is 813-928-0106. Our advisors are standing by to answer any questions you have and assist you in any way they can. Hey, if you're enjoying the show today, which I'm sure you are, be sure to hit like, subscribe, post your comments, share with your friends and family. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have you completed your post-licensing education yet? Look, I know you're probably thinking, hey, it's not my renewal deadline, I don't need to do post-licensing yet, but look, here's why you want to do post-licensing as soon as you've got your real estate license, as soon as you're able to take post-licensing. It's not just another course about arbitrary laws that you're never going to use again. It's about real-world, usable topics that'll help you grow your real estate business, to help you take it to the next level. Look, let me ask you this one question. If this course helps you close just one deal, if you get one extra deal from post-licensing, is it worth the investment? I'd say it is. We get paid pretty well, so one deal means a lot of money. Check out postflorida.com. That's postflorida.com for the full details about post-licensing.